Welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt,
And my name is Jadrian.
and we are happy to have you here. This is probably, we're recording this on a Saturday, and it's going to drop about 5 days later. This is about as tight of a timeline as we ever go.
That's not true, Matt. That's not true. We did one that we had like a 24-hour turnaround once.
We did
That's our
that
fastest
once.
one.
That,
Once.
that was
We
the
did it
fastest.
once.
But we've had months before,
That's
too,
true.
in
You're
between.
right.
But it is April 20th. The 420 has meaning for some people who like substances that I don't partake in. But I guess happy 420 day for all who celebrate, even though it's
I'm celebrating with a beer. So I'm,
yeah,
I'm sticking with our theme. I'm not doing anything else. The rest scares me.
me
I'm
too.
too
And
old. I'm too old to
what
do the rest.
what are you drinking today then?
I'm gonna tell you a story because I think I texted you about this when it happened. I live in Virginia, but those of you who know I'm from Texas, so I have a soft spot for Shiner Brewery. Just about anywhere in the country, I can get a Shiner Bock very regularly. Shiner Bocks are everywhere. But it's really fun when I go to a grocery store and I see the other Shiner that they might have. So even living in Pennsylvania, I generally think my local Wegmans had a Shiner Bock and then whatever their seasonal beer was. And so every now and then I'd get the seasonal beer, and that was great. I think Matt and I have talked about on a previous show. One of my favorite ones is the sea salt and lime Shiner.
Oh, yep.
Oh my God, it's so good. So good. But I was at my local Kroger a couple weeks ago, and I was walking by the single beer section, and I was just sort of like, it caught my eye out of the corner. And I'm actually really surprised because Shiner had not put it on their, I follow their Instagram and everything. They
Yeah.
were not talking about it. They have, I'm assuming is a brand new seasonal because I've never seen it. And I like collect Shiner bottles. That's the level that I'm at on Shiners. A Shiner Shandy, a lemonade Shandy, is their new seasonal. It just happened to catch my eye, and I was like, I've got to get a 6 pack of those. So I'm drinking a Shandy today from Shiner, and it's really good. They did a good job on this one. Not as good as the sea salt and lime, but pretty
But
good.
pretty good. I'm drinking a Go Birds
Mm.
Hazy Pale Ale, not an IPA actually, but a pale ale from Flying Fish Brewing Company.
Flying fish is good.
So I'm looking forward to this. And I guess to start, this is the Saturday. We got actually pretty sad news in our business school
Mm.
Thursday. An Emeriti colleague, and who is really a friend of mine, Rick
Mhm.
Davis, passed away. And he was a big fan. He loved the stuff that was writing. He wasn't a huge podcast guy, but he would sometimes even, I think, listen through the Substack and just play it.
Great.
And he was definitely a huge IPA fan. So I
Okay.
guess
So that one's
as
for
we
him.
cheers this, I'm going to cheers my friend Rick, who passed away, former colleague and friend. But
Did I meet Rick when I visited Susquehanna?
he might have. He was a tax accountant. I mean, if we went out for a drink sometime, he might have come out because he loved to coming out and grabbing a beer and just
Yeah.
shooting the breeze. So
You brought a lot of people out. That's why I'll have to go back and look and
yeah.
see if it's
No, and I on the show notes I might post a couple photos. I spent over a month abroad with Rick and our students. One 18-night trip and then several other trips. So I have some photos of him in front of like flights of beer in London.
great.
Which is, kind of his happy place. So
I mean, hey, those are the sort of professors I always admire. That I mean, being at a liberal arts college is much different than being at other universities like Virginia Tech. But just the idea that like you can care about students all the way in like until the very end. Those are the sort of things I really admire. That people like that just don't sort of give up caring
yeah,
about other people and making sure that whether it's education purposes or just sort of supporting them in life, that people are still doing that. So no,
yeah,
that's great to hear.
that's cool. So well, cheers.
Cheers. I wish we really need that like automated clink noise.
We need a clink noise to throw that in there. But so today we were going to talk about something that's affecting higher ed pretty dramatically right now, and that is the mess that's going on with the FAFSA.
I think
Uh,
mess might be the nicest way to say that. Like I have
yeah,
heard crisis. I have heard
yeah, crisis,
disaster. Like
disaster. I don't know that
fiasco.
I've ever seen such bipartisan support on a total train wreck of an issue, and people,
Mhm.
it's like the one thing that unites the country is how upset everybody is about FAFSA. So many of you would know this, but if you do not, FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And it is not, I don't think it's required for all schools, but it is, a lot of schools will want you to submit a FAFSA. And if you want federal student aid, you have to submit a FAFSA.
I mean, at Virginia Tech, if you want financial aid, if you want like if you're applying for scholarships that are need based, we require a FAFSA.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I believe that's the case at really a lot of institutions.
Hmm.
I don't think it's required. Well, not all of our scholarships are need based, I guess. But
Right.
for the need ones, I'm not 100% of whether that is. It was a relatively easy application, I would say, having filled out a different one called the CSS before.
Okay.
The FAFSA in previous years used to be pretty easy. I've had to fill it out several times. This year, I contacted, I have a rising senior in college still, and I contacted the school and they said, no, we didn't have to fill it out
Hmm.
for next year for them. But the this year it's been a mess. So do you want to give a little bit of the background on the start of the mess or how this all came about, or would you like me to?
I'm gonna have you do it because so
Okay.
Matt and I talked about this a little bit before we started recording. I am not as high up in the administrative chain uh, at the university, so I think I had heard rumblings that there was an issue. I don't
Okay.
have kids, so like I wasn't like I guess closely paying attention to it when it sort of first happened at the beginning of the year. And then I don't even know when it was. Maybe a couple weeks ago, we actually like got an email about it from somebody that was like, "Hey, there are massive issues. Be prepared for what's coming." And I'm like, "What is going on?" So I was like, "I don't. I know very little about what happened, and so I think
Yep. Yep.
you're in a better spot to say what's going on."
Well, for starters, there was a major overhaul that was going to happen with
Mhm.
that the Department of Education approved. So it was not going to be released until December, when usually I believe it was released in October. So it's 2 months later was when the FAFSA was released for people to fill out. And they had a deadline. It must be released in December. And of course, complying with the law, they got it out December 31st with a couple hours to spare, but it was a train wreck. It wasn't ready to even be released then. So it wasn't working very well when it was first released. Uh, Basically, since this new thing has come out, there have been glitches everywhere. Uh, Calculations are being made wrong so that how things are entered, it's not calculating what the student age should be. I think one key thing that was calculated wrong was how many other dependents you might have in college. So if you have a certain salary, it often calculates what a family's expected contribution could be. And so this is a number basically to take the income and, you know, other things around what your income might be, and it would look a little bit at your expenses and then idea, okay, this could be an expected family contribution for a particular student. I believe at first it ignored the fact that you might have had another person in college, which dramatically impacts how
Yeah.
much you could expect to contribute to any one particular student. The Even when it was supposed to be in December,
Hmm.
it was already something that was concerning for a lot of universities because it normally came in October, and we knew we would be delayed in the cycle for being able to make the financial aid offers we wanted to make. One thing that was somewhat reassuring is every university's everybody's in the same spot, so it's not like one university has a major advantage over another, but you're a private school, you're competing for students,
Yeah.
right? You want to get students in. So it was a concern, even if it was released in December and it all went well. But there has just been mistake after mistake after mistake, and they still don't have all of the data released back. They don't have everything computed that they should have computed for those who have submitted the FAFSAs. So it's really been problematic for students to get the financial aid packages from various institutions. we've had students who said, well, I got the offer from Susquehanna, but I haven't gotten it from anybody else, so I can't really compare yet. So I like what I see, but I can't
Right, but
decide.
another school might give me more, and
Another school might give more.
with the
And
cost of college, that's an important
of course,
that is a consideration that we don't want to make the students pick one just because they have some information.
yeah,
If we can get them to save a lot more, we want to be able to help them save.
yeah, that's pretty rational on their parts. But of course, it's delaying what's can be a stressful process for students and
Absolutely.
families. Many of them could have had things figured out by March, focused on other things. Instead, this is still going on.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, I think this is the less of the problem. A problem that some are pointing out is that given the complexity, given this hasn't worked, and people are going in and trying to figure it out, there have been far fewer FAFSAs filed this year than previous years.
Like 40% fewer. I think that's like the number I saw pop up a lot was like 30 to 40% fewer people are submitting it. And like
And
people, that's the reason like a lot of people go to college. Like if you don't submit, if you need it
yeah,
and you don't submit it and don't get the funding, you're less likely to go to college. Because I think it's what we started with, right? This idea that especially if you need the need-based programs and scholarships, if you're not filling it out and you normally would, you're not getting the money to go, so you're not going to go.
yeah, and you're hitting on the exact thing that I think is a much bigger problem.
Mm-hmm.
There will certainly be people who in a normal year would have done this, would have gone on to school, and they're not going to do it. And of course, this will be from the communities that are probably more lower income, more disadvantaged,
Mm-hmm.
more first generation, and probably don't have parents who can maybe help navigate. I mean, not entirely, but I think there'd be a higher concentration among those. And you'll have individuals who college would have been the right choice, and they're not going to go anymore. This is so it's an absolute, it's just a train wreck of what's ended up happening. So our numbers are down a little bit for the next year at Susquehanna in terms of like the overall percentage. We get a report. I don't think I'm giving any
Yeah.
privileged information if I don't give away the exact number. But we're not sure whether we should expect if we're really ahead
Mm-hmm.
or if we're about even or if we're behind, because we know with all of this mess, of course we were going to be behind.
Yeah.
Whatever we were going to be at will be behind because of this. So it's really causing a lot of uncertainty with, I want to say, businesses. I mean, private higher ed has to run itself somewhat like a business in order to stay open. And so it's just been a mess.
We're seeing the same thing. So I'll give the same veiled information as well. My understanding is we have more applications than we've had in the past. Tons of students are applying and wanting to come. But that in terms of sort of acceptance rates, they're putting off that acceptance longer. We still anticipate having the same number of students. I don't think there hasn't, at least from what I heard, we have not had a situation where we have been nervous that we won't get the numbers.
Sure.
But it is exactly what you said, right? Is that this idea that there's an early decision that happens in the fall, and people who don't require the financial need, don't need financial aid, can accept early decisions early, and locking in those spots gives some information to the school that they can then change and make these offers to other people. But I think what you're seeing is sort of like you said, across a lot of schools, there's this delay, and so students are delaying, and they're going right up to that deadline. And then schools are scared to offer financial aid packages because then what if they all accept and all this sort of stuff? And so like it makes it really hard on a school to actually make those offers, make sure that there's enough spots for people, but then students are waiting too. And so I know that there has been concerns because I get certain types of emails and the emails sound very different. It's things like being prepared very quickly to offer scholarships, for example. So they've asked us to do that, which, in the past we've had time to look at them. And
Sure.
this is not so much for incoming students. For us, it's for the juniors and the seniors who, sort of recognizing like we need to be able to sort of turn around in 48 hours and offer scholarships once that data comes in, because it might help them in terms of like coming back next year if they need to go apply for other programs to get funding and stuff. So I'm definitely seeing it in terms of emails. It'll be really interesting what happens. And I'll phrase it I think exactly what you said. Let me start with, Matt, what you said I think is incredibly important in the sense that the ones who are going to be the most affected are sort of right. It's those students on the margin who need
Yep.
to go, who need the funding in order to convince them to go to college. In some senses, we've talked about this sort of previously in the past, and I'm not saying that this is a good outcome whatsoever. So I want to like I think those students being funded to go to college on a if it's a full ride, I think is the better outcome. I would, I sometimes wonder, do you think this will result in like more students going to community college? Do you think it's going to be more students just going straight to work? Do you think it's going to like what do you think the outcomes are if we do see,
Yeah.
let's say we see a reduction of 1 million students who aren't going? I think that was the estimate that I saw that like basically about 1 million students are sort of behind in terms of applying for FAFSA related stuff.
I'd be stunned if it's anywhere near that number. I don't even
What
know
do you,
that it'll be a tenth of that number, but let's
yeah,
say it's 50,000 even.
sure. What do you think
Um,
will happen? Yeah, right. Because those students should eventually, like the FAFSA should eventually kick in. And
yeah.
some of those are, I think it's, there's a difference between first time filers and, the juniors. What do you think? What happens to a student at the margin who is, waiting on a financial aid package, maybe doesn't get it, needs to make a
Yeah.
decision? Do you know anything about, what those students end up doing? Do they go to community college? Do they go straight to work? I don't know.
I would imagine more would probably go to work than the community college, but I do not have the data on that. I think in terms of getting the financial aid packages, it all depends. So if a student was thinking, I need to go to one of the top universities, those are the places that it might be trickier and they might get shut out of if they don't apply in time. If they're looking at most publics and most privates, and that would exclude state flagships like your school, right?
Mhm.
The state flagships in the top, say, 50 liberal arts schools, those are the schools that would have waiting lists in
Yeah.
our schools
Hmm.
like Susquehanna, which is, basically top 100 in liberal arts, very good school. I mean, there's 4,000 schools in the country approximately. So very, very good school. But most schools in the neighborhood of a Susquehanna, yeah, there's a deadline of May 1st. A good student applies on May 15th.
Yeah.
They'll get accepted probably at thousands of schools across the
Yeah.
country, and they would get a financial aid package from them. If the
Mhm.
government can give the aid, the schools would also figure out how to give the financial aid, because most private schools are giving enormous amounts of financial aid because they want the revenue from the student coming in. And
Yeah.
it's sounding cold and calculated when we talk about this, but we realize it's students and it's education and it's life changing. But when you're in this realm, and I have to make sure the books balance so the university continues to run, so we can pay our faculty, so we can pay the bills. So,
Yeah.
you have to think about it. You do have to sometimes step back and think about it cold and in a cold, calculated way. I think any student who apply, if a student fills out the FAFSA in July, there are a lot of places that would take them
Yeah.
and take that information, and they could get a good offer. But I would imagine some will give up. Of the 50,000, yeah, I mean, I would think it would lean more towards, hey, I'll just get a job on a local company and figure it out from there. Maybe there's a few community college, but
No, and I think that's where, I don't know if I shouldn't call myself a bad economist in this space. I have always struggled with the sort of extensive, intensive margin type analysis type thing of like when we make these changes, how does that change like the all the FAFSA sort of mess, the students who are already in college, how does that sort of change the number of hours that they go to college in a semester versus this sort of student on the edge where who may or may not go to college. And I have always really, whether this is an education setting, I've always really struggled to kind of wrap my head around the impacts of things sort of for people involved versus sort of people right on the edge. And that's where I just don't know, right? I've never been in that position. And maybe our high school teachers listening in can help us out a little bit and think about, what are they seeing from high school students who are going through this process, who are having to apply, having to decide where to go. Are they thinking about going to the regional 4-year school that's next door? Are they thinking about not? I don't want to call it a gap. It's not a gap year, but just sort of,
yeah, yeah.
maybe this year is a little too stressful with everything that's going on. Let me go to community college, save a ton of money. Or are they just saying, no, you know what, this mess is just not worth it. I'm just going to go to work and I'll try again next year. I could see that going all sorts of ways. I mean, I think this is something that I've listened to other podcasts talk about. not just around the FAFSA mess, but just sort of the cost of college in general, that it is, I think a lot of students are better at seeing that number and recognizing how big of a number that is. And they're just going, you
Mhm.
know what? Let me take a year
Yeah.
off. I mean, that's the enrollment cliff that we've been talking about for a while, but I wonder how much of this contributes to that is going to kick out some students who just go, this isn't worth the headache. It kicked me back. It said it was wrong. I'm not going to go.
It'll be some. It will be
It's got to
some.
be something, or it's not the reverse, right? More
Yep.
students are not applying because of the headache.
No, and
So it's going to impact some percentage of students that they
it
say, nope, I'm not going to college. This is a headache.
yeah, and
Hmm.
50,000 students nationwide. Once again, once you start to realize that the Virginia Techs and a lot like the state flagship schools and a lot of the say like the top 50 or so in top 50 universities in rankings
Yeah.
for the private schools, they will get the same numbers. They will end up with the same numbers. But if you have 50,000 fewer students over the other, you know, 2,000 schools, 25 fewer students per school on average, if I'm doing my math right quickly. Well, if the average student's paying 10 to 15,000, I mean, it depends whether it's public or private, but if it's 10 to 15,000 in tuition and it's room and board is not cheap at a lot of places anymore. So I'll say 15,000. So we'll say it's 25 to $30,000, which is less than what it costs to go to Penn State,
Yeah.
like a state school. 25 if it's what did I say? 25 students on average fewer
Hmm.
times $25,000 per student, that's 625,000 less in revenue. And yeah, maybe you save a little bit on costs, but not much, right? I mean, there are a lot of fixed costs at institutions. That'll have a major impact. Part of the demographic cliff that Jadrian mentioned, for those who aren't aware, I imagine most of you are. In 2026, if you subtract back 18 years, it was 2008, right when the Great Recession started. The number of babies born in the US dropped by about 12 or 13% from 2008 to 2011, which means the number of 18-year-olds in 2026 it reaches a peak, and then it will fall by 12%. And higher ed, it will be a bloodbath in higher ed, because not only will there be fewer students, we all know economics, because there's fewer students, you would imagine a number of the schools will then reduce the price, supply and demand, so it will be less revenue per student at the same time. Maybe we will see that a little bit sooner this year.
I want to highlight an article that I just found. I was searching for this while Matt and I were talking. This is actually I found it as an MBER working paper, but my guess is it's been published. I doubt that this is still yeah, it was published in AER in 2003 by Susan Dynarski. Do you know her? She's at Michigan.
Yeah,
Yep.
I've seen some of the tweets, I think.
Yeah, no, she's a big education economist
Yeah.
at the University of Michigan. So I was curious while Matt was talking, and I wanted to sort of know this answer, right? When we're thinking about how important is it for financial aid for these students sort of at the margin who are thinking about going, not going, right? There's a batch of students who are definitely going to go no matter what, because they've been sort of, I don't want to say groomed is not the right word, but their parents can afford it. It's funding's never been an issue. It's expected of them. And then there's these sort of students on the margin who they need the financial aid to convince them to go. So these are numbers from back in 2000, so 20-year difference. Dynarski found that for each $1,000 of student benefits increases the share of high school graduates attending college by about 3.6 percentage points. Eligibility for the benefit program increased the number of years of schooling completed by about 1 year. And so even something as small, and again, this was 20 years ago, the cost of college has gone up, absolutely. But even if we think about $1,000, I talk about this with administrators all the time because it drives me insane when I see some of the stuff that comes out of kind of funding for stuff. There's these big pushes to give full ride scholarships or really big dollar scholarships of like, here's a $20,000 scholarship that this person won, which for that one individual student is amazing. Like I don't want to take anything away from that student. They work really hard, but man, could we give 20 different people $1,000 and the impact that that would have on just a lot of, and we've talked about this in previous episodes too, that $1,000 is not that much money. That in terms of the grand scheme of budgets,
Yep.
that are out there, and endowments and scholarship programs and stuff. And the idea that like an extra $1,000 is going to increase like the number of people going, and that's really sort of the kicker
Yeah.
for a lot of these, that we have a lot of impact of relatively small, spreading it out across a bunch of different people. So I thought that was really interesting. I wanted to find that answer because I figured it was out there somewhere, and of
Yeah,
course
that's good. That's
she's
good
able to
data.
help.
No, we at the school had an alum who I'm pretty sure does not want me to mention his name. This is somebody who is incredibly generous and also doesn't want it known
Yeah.
necessarily, but gave a nice gift actually exactly for that, like for $1,000 gifts for students who are excelling. So in like sophomore, junior, seniors, it went into an endowed gift. So pretty soon we'll have that to start to give to several students.
No, and I think that's great to be able
Makes a big deal.
To be able to give a lot of people a little bit of help. And again, I think it goes back. There are definitely students who need and deserve large, full rides. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying that we shouldn't give out any full rides or anything. But to be able to give a lot of smaller scholarships to students of recognizing what they're doing can be a huge help to those individual students.
Yeah. So within I think this is such a mess. Like this is a total mess. And I put in I won't quote my own LinkedIn message, but I made a post and I was stunned at how much support from people I know kind of on both sides of the political aisle. But I think one of the biggest failings of principles of economics, and I was very guilty of this for most of when I taught, is the lack of attention we give to government failures. I think that is actually the single biggest flaw in principles, because like you spend a fair amount of time, right, Jadrina, on how much time do you spend on externalities and public goods and monopoly?
I knew this was coming. I knew it was coming.
Well, yeah, I mean, I in the note
sure,
I said
so sure. No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I think I have a nice balance of the two. I do talk about externalities and market failures.
Which we should. Right?
I spend I'll say a day and a half. So I teach a 3-hour course. Matt teaches a 4-hour course. We've talked about this in the past, but just to, I would say I have the standard amount of time, and Matt gets a little bit extra time than I do. So I probably spend about a day and a half on externalities, half a day on common resources. I take a little bit of public goods, but not really. I'll be honest, the monopoly failure, I don't talk about the government intervening on monopolies at all, but I do talk about market failures from monopolies. To be honest, I probably spend more time talking about, I'm going to say more time in the sense of not probably as much time as you do, or other people who really love the failure of the government. But I also am not I'm not on the full markets work all the time. And I'm not on the full, like, government needs to solve every single issue. So, I spend a lot of time talking about price ceilings, price floors, how arbitrarily changing prices is dumb. I talk about taxes and quotas, and I really try to emphasize the deadweight loss of a tax. I teach international trade, so I do talk about in that space. Beyond that, no, I don't really have a sort of public choice problems of the government, problems of organized collective action. I don't talk about that.
And so my first several years, despite, I've pretty much been pretty free market the whole time. My first several years, I didn't have that in at all. Even though I felt that way, I just kind of followed the textbook and I didn't think. And then I added a little section, and I still, looking back, it has been a few years since I've taught principles. I think I paid too little attention. And part of the idea is, so when we teach externalities, you talk about what the Pigovian tax or the Pigovian subsidy, the idea that the problem with pollution, right? People are affected when they're not part of the transaction. And in what the way you could correct that is you tax the pollution.
You just got to know how much the pollution tax is.
Yes. So
who's going to figure out that?
Yeah. And so that's the problem I think our students come away with, right? They say, oh, so the externalities, clearly, if we see one, we must do it because there is a market failure, and market failure should be taught, but then it assumes a perfectly functioning government can fix it.
That they can fix it, they can figure out how much it is, they can monitor it. Yeah. No, and I will say, I talk about it, I don't go in depth on it.
And it's a unicorn, right? Governments aren't perfectly functioning. And so that's, I don't know what the right mix, I don't know what the right way to do it. I still think externalities and market failures, they clearly need to be taught. I
Yeah.
don't know how to balance the fact that I think my students, and this is like me being a pretty free market person, like really free market person. I think my students left with way more of an idea that the government could fix it than I think was really optimal. And
Oh
I
my
don't know
God,
what
that's
should be
exactly what
done.
I was about to say. So
Yeah.
I will say, I am not okay. So Matt and I are being very careful in how we describe this because there are a group of economists that are very free market economists, that have a reputation. They're great people, but yeah, there's a stream of thought that is very extreme if you go against that. I will say I in class I do try to balance the line. So I'll give you the price floors and price ceilings as an example. You know, I spend a whole chunk talking about price
Sure.
ceilings and rent control and look at all the problems of rent control and like look at, you know, I show the Stossel videos, right? I talk about how artificially capping prices is
Yep.
not the way to do it. Like I will say I lean into the free market idea in that lesson. I use discussion boards in class. So I use packback discussion boards where students can post their own questions of what they want to talk about. And Matt, it is exactly what you just said. Every week that I finish teaching that lesson, I log back in and it's students advocating that it doesn't matter that there's all these problems. We need rent control in Blacksburg, for example. We need prices to come down because that is helping some people. And I'm sitting here going like, oh my God, have I just like completely mistaught this? But I think what's surprising is that it's only after been the past couple semesters where I've realized that I don't know if I'm not emphasizing the right part. I'm sitting here going like, look, how's the government supposed to know what price is the right price?
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of my students are listening to it going, it doesn't matter if there's deadweight loss. It doesn't matter if there's shortages. Some people are benefiting and the government should do it because they can help some people with lower prices. And I'm just like, I'm not doing a good job teaching.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
messed this
Yeah.
up because that's not the message I'm trying to send here. And you know, I talk about alternatives. I talk
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
subsidies to help people that we can subsidize, and that actually will get the right amount. Like, no, Matt, I think it goes back to exactly what
Yeah.
you said. Is even when you do it, I think a lot of people go, nope, the government can do it. They can solve
Yeah,
the
yeah.
problem.
You raise a good point. I think a lot of people probably come in with everybody has a bias they
Mhm.
come in with, and they may hear a little bit of what they want or kind of
Yeah, I mean,
minimize or maximize, and maybe that's not it. No,
I
I
talk about
appreciate.
I talk about tariffs and the problem with international trade
Yeah.
and how it doesn't really create jobs, and that's a
Oh
myth
yeah.
because it hurts exports every week on the discussion boards. We should still tax imports because like it is creating jobs. He said it creates jobs, and I was
Oh
like,
gosh.
but I
Yeah.
also said
Yeah.
it doesn't. Like, what you're missing this other part that I talked about.
It's
You
like
know, I think
politics speak, econ speak is nuanced, right? Like economics is, yeah, there's
yeah.
costs and benefits, and I think politics is not as nuanced. And
Well, so let's talk
it's,
about this and let's re-pivot back so that we can sort of wrap up in this last section about like
yeah,
why are we talking about FAFSA? Like why is the government doing FAFSA? Matt and I talked about this a little bit before, so I can share a little bit of a background just because I taught labor economics before, and there is an interesting argument for sort of a centralized funding source for students to be able to go to school, and it's going to be similar to some of the stuff you've heard kind of as we worked our way through these. Is that we could have a market that provides loans to students. We could actually have the banking system or the financial system providing loans to students instead of this sort of student aid requiring people to apply for it. I like to call it the backwards way of doing it.
yeah,
Instead of making students go through it, we could have banks offer those, and students would need to go to a local bank I mean, there's banks that still do it. So those of you who have taken out a private loan know that these options are out there.
yeah,
And you likely also know that the interest rate on those private loans is high. It is a very high amount relative to sort of what value a government loan can provide instead. And so I talked about this before in my labor economics course, and it's always sort of an interesting one to talk about. There's all the frustrations of is the government like are they capable of even providing this loan at all? But sort of on or like I guess administering the loan is probably the better way of thinking about it. But when it comes to sort of the government providing the loan, it creates what's known as, or sorry, the private industry requiring it, it creates what's known as a capital market imperfection. That's the long fancy econ title. But it's basically the idea that banks don't necessarily want to loan money to students for education. If you're going to loan money to somebody, you might loan money to a friend or a family, but a bank
Sure.
wants collateral. That's why housing loans are much more affordable than student loans. You don't pay your mortgage, the bank's going to take your house.
Yeah.
Don't
Yep.
pay your car loan, the bank's going to take your car back. Don't pay your student loan. Well, wait, they
There's
can't.
not much they can take.
They
Yep.
can't repossess your degree. You still have the human capital.
Yep.
And so as a result, they charge higher interest rates than they would for something that's collateralized. And then it goes back to exactly what Matt and I were talking about at the beginning. The people who can put up collateral are the ones who largely don't really need the loans to begin with. And so people who don't have houses, don't have cars, don't have cash in the bank are essentially paying these much higher rates instead. And so a government system makes it a little bit easier. And those of you who have student loans know this, you can't default on your student loans. You can't bankrupt on it because there's no collateral for the government to take.
Yeah.
And so there are these sort of weird sort of situations in space. So it's one of those things where I think it makes a lot of sense for the government to do it because we have these sort of capital market banking issues.
Mhm.
But then at the same time, you're asking a massive organization with lots of other priorities to try to figure out the right way to do it. And you're getting the FAFSA mess, crisis, fiasco, disaster. Insert your word instead. And so I think it's explained sort of what's the alternative, and I don't know that the alternative is necessarily better.
On this one, I don't know that it is. I just think this is a good illustration.
It's hard, right?
If I were to teach principles this next semester, and I am bringing up government failures, I am bringing up, actually for the next several years, I'm bringing up FAFSA because it's something all students can connect with.
Yeah.
And it's one of those when I teach externalities and public goods, I try to emphasize, look, we've talked about this, that the government can fix it, but boy, it can't be a minor nuisance because governments aren't perfect.
Yes.
And how many of you know about the FAFSA? And right, like that would instantly, I think, resonate. Yeah. So I think for economics educators, when you're talking about government failures, which if you're not, I would encourage you to add a little section on public choice and government failures. The FAFSA, I think, is very good to bring up, even though, like, I'm not saying it shouldn't necessarily be there, although I think there could be improvements on how it's administered.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is actually a really good sort of in between where it's a mess right now. It is a mess because people are trying to fix something that, to be fair, should have been fixed. It was too long, right? I agreed with them when all that stuff was passed. I mean, I don't know how long ago that. When did they first? I think I saw it while I was looking through stuff. I think they first sort of proposed it like 3 or 4 years ago. Like it was old, and this was the deadline. It's something that probably should have been fixed. We could have made it more efficient. We probably could have done a better job. But I think exactly what you said, it highlights we're trying to do something really big, and even if you are really well funded, it's hard to do things right. And the government, I think you've said this in a previous episode, doesn't necessarily always have the best employees. The brightest and smartest are probably working in industry, not working in government. So it's hard, it's challenging, but it's also important to remember that the alternative is maybe not better either. And so it's just trying to figure out like the best of a bad situation. I think there's a
least bad. I don't know.
Least bad situation. I actually have a video clip about this. Maybe this is actually what I'll use as my
okay. Yeah, we've probably gone a little bit long. So what?
I think we're okay. I think I've been watching the time. I think we're okay. I think
we're
right at
a clock on how long we go and
really
in front of me because I don't quite know. But I do have a media clip in mind for today. If which I could go first, or I could hand it off to you to go. So if you have
you go first.
Okay. Well, it's always fun when I can go back to Hamilton, the musical, for something. Probably for those, I don't know how big of a theater person you are. I know I'm clearly much more than, 99% of the population, but I've seen a lot of shows. And what I love about shows is every now and then you see a song, or, if you're in a musical, or you see a moment and you're like, I cannot believe that I'm here and how unbelievable this thing is that I'm watching right now. And in terms of like those moments in theater are just, to me, like priceless. It's what it's like chasing a high, and they don't happen that often. But one of the single best moments I ever saw in a theater, because I had not heard the song yet, I intentionally hadn't listened to Act 2, was The Room Where It Happens from Hamilton.
Okay.
Which is just a spectacular song. And then how it's all set up. And I knew it was going to come. It's about the dinner table compromise between Hamilton, Jefferson, and Madison, where they agreed that there would be a central bank. The U.S. would take over the national debts, but then in exchange, they moved the capital down to Washington, D.C., which, Virginia at the time, they moved it out. It's an incredible song, but it talks about the actions that are taken. And there's a great line in there where Jefferson's not really excited about this, but Madison actually asks him, wouldn't you rather like to work closer to home? Or like saying, hey, don't you want this a little bit closer? Not really thinking about the best thing for the constituents. I mean, these are the lyrics in a song. We don't know what actually happened here. But it's a nice example of a politician taking an action and saying, yeah, I'll make this compromise because, boy, it'd be really great to have a shorter commute than thinking through, yes, well, this is clearly the best thing for the country, in my opinion. And so in that way, I think it is a somewhat nice illustration of where we would say a government does fail.
Right.
A politician would have other things in their mind other than the constituents, which is a different example of the principal agent problem, which you could go back and listen to in our previous episode. If you
We need to make sure that we include a link to that.
We will have to include the link to that.
So I actually have. I was furiously searching. Matt got to see it because I was muting my volume, so you can always tell if I'm looking something up in the moment, muting my microphone. I have a clip for capital market imperfections. It is something that I use. It's from a Netflix stand-up from Neil Brennan. And it is essentially like he's sort of as a comedy thing explaining the capital market imperfections of just sort of like imagine sort of a cheesy example where you walk into the bank and you're like, please give me $100,000, invest in me rather than investing in a business. And then the banker basically going like, well, what are you going to do? Like, why would I give you $100,000? And he's like, I'm going to be a theater major. And so like the idea that like banks are going to sit there and go, no, we don't want to do that. And so it's sort of this nice little, it's a nice kind of summary, funny version of investing in college and being like, just how difficult it is to get a bank to want to do that instead. So
I don't think
I'll link that in.
I will. I'm looking forward to watching that one myself. So.
Awesome.
So, any parting words of wisdom for the audience?
Matt and I are almost at the end of our semesters, which means if you're a college professor, you are probably almost also at the end of your semester. If you're a high school teacher, I'm sorry, you still have weeks to go. And we will try to remember to wish you good luck in your final weeks. But man, am I looking forward to a long summer break. Matt and I will be seeing each other in about a month at C-Tree. And so if you are an economics educator and you are going to Atlanta at the end of May, or you live in Atlanta, that's fine too. Like you don't have to be going to this conference. Right. And you would like to be on this show, please let Matt and I know because we will definitely try to find some time to squeeze in a trip. Matt and I will definitely go to a brewery. I can bring a microphone, but we would love to talk to people. And then that will also give us content over the summer so that Matt and I can try to relax a little bit and listen to other people. The Jet Set ones, I think, went so well. I had so much fun doing that. Yep. I would love to do that at C-Tree. So if you're in Atlanta, you're going to Atlanta, please reach out to Matt or I. Either me or Matt, and like let us know that we're going to be there. We would love to talk to you.
Yeah. I know that. Looking forward to that. And once again, appreciate everybody. I was joking with Jadrian. Jadrian is the more famous of the two of us, and I'm perfectly okay with that. But I handed a card, and I'm going to forget who I handed it to over this. So if you're listening, just say thank you. I appreciated this. I was at a conference a few days ago for AACSB, and I handed a card, and then I included the sticker. We have a sticker for Economics Happy Hour. You're the other one. And like, it's pretty awesome that this person I didn't know is listening to the podcast.
That's what matters.
What?
Our names don't matter. Just the fact that y'all are listening makes us happy.
I really appreciated it, and it's pretty cool. And admittedly, my name is somewhat common, so on that, but it's pretty awesome. Hearing that stuff is really meaningful. We appreciate that all of you who listen, who comment, who give us those reviews. And if you haven't, it's not too late to give a good review on your favorite podcast network.
Share it on social media, like it. We love to see it.
All of the things. Well, thank you again, Jadrian. Nice discussion, and
I got the most of it. I'm going to go outside and finish the rest of this. Cheers, Matt.